Good evening to everybody who's watching this, and welcome to 40 Days Bible Study number 109. We're looking at Matthew 1 from verse. We'll see how far we can get with this. As people come in, it's 8 p.m. on February 27th in Trinidad.
So it's 8 p.m. You said 8 a.m.
Wow, I have no clue what time of day it is. Thanks. 8 p.m. I appreciate that correction. Good evening and welcome to Joshua, and good evening and welcome to Miss Dekoto. And
Good night. Good night.
oh, welcome. And Miss Merrill, welcome, ladies. Very, very nice to have you all with us. Recording has started, so we're going straight into this lovely word of God. Matthew. We are on Matthew 6, people. And as you can see on Matthew 6 on the screen, if Zoom would stop blocking, right. And Jesse, the father of David the king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Now, looking at this, we spoke about the part where the wife of Uriah, we sorted that out, where the English translation should have been, had been the wife of Uriah. We've cleared that up, right? This is the verse where there's a discrepancy between Matthew's recollection of the genealogy and Luke's written record of the genealogy of Jesus' ancestry, all right? Matthew Poole mockingly said that the person who would doubt the longevity of people from Salmon here on screen, Salmon, to David, they would have looked at how the number of people there, men would have to live over 100 years. And he said, Matthew Poole, the scholar, said, those men must have a great mind to quarrel with the divine. If it's in the Bible, take it as gospel truth, because the Bible is the gospel truth. You know, we must note here that David, the king, we'll get to the split between Luke and Matthew, by the way. I just mentioned that as an intro. David was a lion killer and a bear killer. But amongst his brothers, David was relegated to minding sheep. Unlike his brothers, David was looking at sheep. His brothers were sent out to war for their country by their father. This carries a certain level of implied information. Think now. Let's look at the implications. Remember Joseph and his brothers? Who was watching the sheep when Joseph and his brothers came into our lives as adults? The brothers were watching the sheep.
Effect. Not gonna lie, getting the piercing.
And welcome to Deandra. So we know that Joseph was favored and he wasn't watching the sheep. So that tells us the guy who gets to watch the sheep is kind of like the second-class citizen. Joseph's brothers were second-class citizens. They were watching the sheep. Joseph was home. Shepherd duty was not for the favored children. Remember Rachel? She was tending her father's flocks when Jacob met her. Think about that. What kind of man would send his daughter out to do that kind of work and place her in such a vulnerable position? Now, obviously, Rachel was trustworthy and hardworking. Rachel was a very good example of what young ladies should be. Hardworking, humble, obedient. Yeah. Not the little princesses and queens, slave queens with like 10-inch nails on their fingers who can't serve a purpose in any useful way, right? Rachel was a hardworking lady. Obviously, Rachel was good, hardworking, and so on, but not favored. Leah was not mentioned there, so we can guess Leah was home. Leah was the one that was favored. Now, yes, Leah was the one that Laban offloaded onto Jacob but most likely because Laban favored her. And he gave her the opportunity to bear children by having the husband, which she did, but Laban offloaded her. Jacob wanted Rachel, Laban offloaded Leah. I'm going somewhere with this, so ride along with me. Remember, women were valued back in those days based on their childbearing ability. So a woman who bore a child, you're a woman. You didn't bear a child, you ain't no woman. It's a disgrace or something to them. Nowadays, we have a little more sense than that, right? But Laban tried to give Leah that opportunity because he favored her. Rachel was watching the sheep because she was not favored. Jacob's brothers were watching the sheep. They were not favored. All of this, I'm trying to get to the point that David, who we know as king, conqueror, lion killer, bear killer, etc., and warrior, David was just minding sheep when his brothers went out to war. His family knew him, and they treated him as a runt, as a reject, as a afterthought. It's a big lesson to us, though. Many people that we see out there in the real world, that's a big deal. And I'm talking people who you might see as presidents, CEOs, even here, like you might see authority figures, big time cops, even your teachers, pastors, business owners, engineers, doctors, all these kinds of big people. They may have been rejects in their own little family situation, which might explain why some people act arrogantly out of their insecurities when they are at work or when they're among friends. And from that, we have to take some lessons. We must be different. Many of you may not be treated as the most respected or powerful sibling in your homes. You may not be the favored child or cousin or grandchild. So because of your position in the social structure of your home, you might be treated poorly, you might be treated like less than the others, and you feel it, you know it, but that doesn't matter when you go out into the world. You're a child of the creator of everything, so your heritage and your ancestry is regal. It's honorable, and you must carry that heritage with honor. Absolutely. Remember where you came from, and where you came from is not your parents, your grandparents, your neighborhood, and that nonsense. Where you came from is you were brought to life in Christ the day you died, and a risen new creation was born. Righteous, justified by faith in Jesus. David was called David the king twice in this verse. We don't see it here. It's not given in our translations, but it's given twice in this verse. I saw that mentioned by one of the commentators, Bengals Newman, I think. And in the translations I looked at, I only found two where David the king was mentioned twice, and that was in Webster's Bible translation, and of course, Young's literal translation. Young's is tough to read, but a solid one to use. All the others left it out from being said, David the king, 2 times, because they thought it would have been redundant. The interlinear doesn't even have it twice. The interlinear is in the original language. But Bengals Gnomon makes reference to others that agree. And the references they give were abbreviations that I couldn't follow. I don't know their references. Jameson, Fawcett, Brown mentioned the 2 times thing in their commentary. Most commentators, though, despite all that, most commentators agree that the use of the words, the king, use of those words at all, was to emphasize that David's throne was promised to Jesus. And Cambridge said David himself was a type of Christ, starting a line, okay, a new line. The promise and giving of the throne to David was not done in anger as it was done for Saul, because God was angry when he like, you want a king? I'll give you a king. Take a king. This is the kind of king you'd like. Then he gave them David because they didn't deserve their king of choice, because that king wouldn't work out. God's choice is always better than ours anyways, right? Israel murmured and complained, and that's why they got an angry version of a king. Now, this is the point here where Jesus is connected to the royal house of Israel through David, not through Saul, through David. Saul's line was condemned, it was cut off because God had other plans, and his plans always prevail. Let's consider Israel wanted a king. They wanted a king that they could see as opposed to God that they couldn't see. Truth is, we can't see God naturally because if we did, we'd die. Moses wanted to. God gave him a glimpse, but not even a good glimpse because Moses would drop dead. Israel paid for their desires because their kings abused them. Even the good were unnecessary burdens because they had to keep these kings and keep their lives going and everything. Their choice of a king, Saul, was a tall that God gave them, but he failed. That king failed, Saul. God let him fail so that they could learn that God's best is better than anything we could choose. David did a lot for Israel, unlike Saul, because David was a king of promise. When we follow God's will, we enjoy the benefit of God's promises. Pulpit commentary carries a lot of information, and part of it agrees with my statement where I said David was a king of promise. It says God dealt with David in the same way he dealt with Israel, in that the first king was cut off, and David's first child by Uriah's wife, Bathsheba, was also cut off. The second king after David, who was the one to carry on David's legacy and line in God's plan, was the second son, which was Solomon. So the second king of Israel carried on God's line. And David was treated the same way. His second son by Bathsheba was the one to carry out the line, not the first one. The first one died as a baby. Saul died and his whole line was cut off. Luke and Matthew here will divert, as I mentioned earlier, where Matthew says David the father of Solomon. Luke said David the father of Nathan. That's where they divert. They divert up until verse 12, where they meet back at Shealtiel. Here's where they reconvene. So between David and Shealtiel, Luke's genealogy differs from Matthew's. The line of Nathan continues for a similar number of names as for the line of Solomon here. So Luke's generational steps are equal to what Matthew offers here. All right? So Pulpit looked at it as some other well-kept line of names that was quite accurate as well. Vincent's word studies points out that the genealogy is 3 sets of 14 names. 14 names in this first paragraph, 14 names in the second, and 14 in the third. We'll get to a part of this here where they leave some names out though. But there's a reason for all that too. God does everything for a purpose. It's not guesswork. All right? The 3 sets of names coincide with a critical epoch in Israel's history. The first, this paragraph here, is the start to the first king. The first king to captivity in Babylon. And the captivity in Babylon to Jesus. We'll see another trio to explain those paragraphs even better than this later on. Right? So hold on to that thought. We'll see better than that. Let me just get back to 6, right? David's kingship was assured despite the actions of people. Men tried to spoil David's kingship. Number 1, Saul was in place, David wasn't in place. And then number 2, I don't know if you all know this, but David's own son tried to take the kingdom. We get to that when we reach at that point in life, somewhat way in the future. 10 of the 12 tribes rebelled and left the line of David by creating their own nation. Guess where they are now? They're known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel because nobody can find them. They're gone. The split of the nation happened after Solomon, and it didn't matter because the two remaining tribes, Judah and Benjamin, kept the promise of God, and they were used, albeit unwillingly sometimes, they were used by God to bring to bring the King of Kings into the world. Judah, the fourth son of Jacob, received the blessing of Jacob, and that blessing was reserved for the firstborn. But Judah got the blessing because the other three before him, they disqualified themselves. Reuben, firstborn, he slept with his father's concubine, disgraceful. Simeon and Levi deceitfully killed a town of men in revenge. Some would say they had good reason, but it was a deceitful way that they approached the situation, and they were disqualified. So we lost Reuben, we lost Simeon, we lost Levi. Who's next? Judah. He got the blessing. Judah and Benjamin, the other tribe that remained in the southern kingdom. Benjamin was a son of the favored wife, Rachel. It was in making Benjamin that Rachel didn't make it. She died, right? They were the ones to remain faithful to God and continue the line. Judah himself, as I pointed out before, he was involved in wrongdoing with his own daughter-in-law, Tamar. But he humbled himself when she pointed out his sin, and he repented. It's amazing how powerful repentance is in God's eyes, not our eyes. We don't like humble people. We don't respect humble people. We don't elevate and celebrate humble people. We celebrate arrogance. But God celebrates humility. It should tell us a lot. Verse 7. And Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, and Abijah, the father of Asaph. We go here from Solomon to Asaph, also called Asa. Some we'll get to a point where they tell us Asa is actually the better translation. Solomon to Rehoboam, to Abijah, to Asaph. In the original languages section of the commentaries, like the exegetical, there are only 2.5 lines for this. So it is really like, I thought this would be really short, but then the expository side of the page, they had a ton of stuff. So we'll get through that too. The exegetical piece, those 2.5 lines told us that bad men, even though they're useless in life, have a purpose because the elect may come from their lineage. They were talking here. Joseph Benson talks about the Great Divide. The Great Divide was the splitting of the nation of Israel. Northern Kingdom of Israel, 10 tribes. Southern Kingdom of Judah, 2 tribes, Judah, Benjamin. Historically, the rest of Israel almost actually killed off Benjamin way back in the time of Judges. Yeah, Benjamin almost didn't make it. In Judges 19 to Judges 21, we read of a revenge war. I'm not going to go there like to read up all this stuff, just give you a little condensed version. But what had happened is unbridled lust led to Benjamin almost being wiped out. Benjamin was reduced to 600 men only. And they had to get wives. And all of Israel promised, and they made a covenant that we're not going to give Benjamin our daughters as wives. Cursed be the man that does it. So Benjamin couldn't get wives for the 600 remaining Benjamites. They couldn't get them, the wives from the other tribes, and they could have been wiped out. Israel actually wiped out and killed men and married women in a town called Jabesh Gilead to leave the virgins for them to get married too. That wasn't enough. Benjamin's men had to go out and capture women from a town called Shiloh to make up the rest of the wives. There's some strange history we have to read still. Okay? Lots of history stuff we have to read that is just coming out in little bits here. Benjamin almost got wiped out, but part of it in Judges 21:21 was eerily similar to October 7th, the invasion, murder, rape, and kidnapping of Israelis at the music festival. And I should go to that. I want to show you all that. Judges 21:21, just for you to see. Because when I read it, it hit me like, starting verse 20, they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in ambush in the vineyards and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. Remember, Hamas attacked people at some music festival. It's like so similar. I'm not saying it was the same thing. I'm just saying it's really similar. And this is something Israelites did to themselves. And here we are, so many thousands of years later, Hamas did it to Israel, albeit in a way worse way, of course, the absolutely worst way, right? It doesn't compare, but there is similarity in the way they operated to ambush people when they come out to dance. Take note here, though, that none of this, the destruction of Benjamin, the repopulation of Benjamin, the way it was done, none of that would have pleased God. And in Judges 21, look at the last verse. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. You know what that says? Lawlessness. The people were not being led by submission to God. Jeroboam took the 10 tribes and led them to idolatry. This son of, Jeroboam, not Rehoboam. Sorry, I did not make a mistake here. Jeroboam was the king of the 10 tribes who split the country from Rehoboam. He was not a son of David or son of Solomon either. He took the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom and he led them to idolatry that we would have seen in earlier mention of 2 golden calves that were placed at Bethel and Dan. Okay, curious, that church in Redding, California called Bethel Church. Why would you call your church Bethel? The town Bethel became one of the housing sites for the golden calf. Curious enough, I have something to mention about them if I remember. Remind me Bethel later, y'all. The nonsense that goes on in churches that are big. Now, Jeroboam did this whole thing with the 2 calves, the golden calves in Dan and Bethel, to keep the people under him. Here was his logic, right? Here was his logic. He thought the people would go against him if they had to go to the temple in Jerusalem, southern kingdom. So I'll give them 2 different places to go and worship so they don't have to go to Jerusalem. They'll stay under my leadership. It's so dumb, but it worked. Why did it work? Not because he's so smart, but because the people were so stupid. The people of the northern kingdoms, the northern tribes, the northern kingdom, they went along with it. This shows you that true worship of God is not seen in church attendance. That said, go to church. We have 40 days, come to 40 days. You must not forsake the assembling of yourselves, okay? Don't. Make sure you go to church. But be careful, because many people who we see going to church may not be worshiping the one true God. Some people just need to go through motions to make themselves feel good. And if you're going to church for your feelings, you're wasting your time. You have to go to church to serve God in obedience and submission to him. That's church worship, that's church service, okay? We don't go to church to get a good feeling. We don't. The people were so ungodly, they just went along and accepted it. Now, this is like people today in churches, because they go to churches that tell them what they want to hear. They go to churches that seem convenient because of the location, or convenient because of the status. I go to this big church. I'm such a cool person. I've heard people say, yes, he or she goes to Open Bible, or he or she goes to faith centers, if that's supposed to impress me. And my face, I don't know what my face looks like, but I'm pretty sure my face is like, ew, I'm ready to puke. You're trying to impress me with nonsense. We are told to assemble, and the assembly must be with the saints of God. How do you know the saints of God? Not because they walk around calling them Saint Billy or Saint Bishala, but because of their behavior. By their fruit you shall know them. Test the spirits, common as spirits, what leads and motivates them. Okay? Many churches don't preach the whole word. They're bogged down by traditions, political correctness, and people pleasing. Some are seeker-sensitive churches, which means they try to please the ones whom they are seeking. They don't actually try to serve the Lord, who they should be serving. This turn away from God was why the northern kingdom was easy prey for the Assyrians. God weakened them so the Assyrians would come and take them over. John Gill was the guy that said Asa is correct, Asaph is incorrect. Verse 8, and Asaph, or Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat, the father of Joram, and Joram, the father of Uzziah. Poole gives us a curious note to be made about the name of Jehoshaphat. The Greek rendition of this is Jehoshaphat, not Shaphat, Jehoshaphat, because there's no letter to express the Hebrew H in Greek. Jehoshaphat was the son of Asa, a good son to a good father. That's how we describe them. The expositor's Greek Testament talks about missing kings between Joram and Uzziah. This is a big issue here. 3 kings were missing. I had to go now and find who was missing. And I had to read through chapters 8 to chapter 14 of 2 Kings. And that's hard to read, y'all, because it's 2 kingdoms, and this king was reigning, and they talk about the northern kingdom, and then they go talk about the southern kingdom when this king took over, and it's hard to follow which king, which kingdom, at least for my poor little brain. Jehoram's gruesome and slow end. Jehoram, I said Jehoram, right? Joram was also called Jehoram. His gruesome and slow end was told to us in 2 Chronicles 21:19-20. I wonder if I should bring that up. We're almost at the end. I can't believe this. We're almost at the end and I didn't get to start verse 8 properly. Y'all, I am not deliberately keeping this long, okay? Jehoram also killed his brothers and other princes of Israel when he became king. He made Ahaziah, his child would have been a king called Ahaziah. Ahaziah died, and Athaliah, his mother, ruled in his place. So Jehoram's wife, Athaliah, would have ruled. Guess what? Athaliah, who took over, she was Ahab's daughter, King Ahab. She was his daughter. And just like her idiot father, she was horrible. When she took over from her son, from her husband's, after her son died, she took over after her son died, who took over after his father died. So follow Athaliah, her husband was Joram. He died. His son, Ahaziah, came on, took over. Ahaziah is not here. He took over. He died. He didn't last very long. Athaliah, Joram's wife, she took over. And when she did, she killed off all the kids that remained. Jezebel-like behavior, Ahab's stupidity. I don't think Athaliah was Jezebel's kid, though, but you know, she was Ahab's kid, and she killed all his kids except for one guy called Joash. Joash was saved by his aunt, and Joash became king at 7 years old. Athaliah was killed when Joash took over. So it was Ahaziah, then his mother for a little period, and then Joash. So official righteous kings, Ahaziah, Joash. Joash led to Amaziah. I know the name's kind of hard to follow. Amaziah. So Ahaziah, Joash, Amaziah. Joash was killed by his servants. The son that took over from him was as Amaziah and then Azariah. Azariah is also called Uzziah. And we're at 8:30, so I really should stop here. Just letting you know, Uzziah here was a leper, and he didn't rule much of his own life. He lived in seclusion because of the leprosy that he had. And in all of this, we're going to see why these three kings were left out. When I looked at the kings, Ahaziah was bad, the other two were decent, and there was no similarities or causalities that I could identify as to why these three were left out from the listing between, where is it? Yeah, between Joram and Uzziah. Why were they left out? You'll see that next week. I'll have to save that for next week. Wouldn't be able to explain all of that. So we're going to continue next time from Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah, why they were missing from this account by Matthew. I will have to close off here, so we'll take some questions. I have to tell you all about Bethel, the actual Bethel Church. So people watching on YouTube, thanks very much for joining us. We'll see you next week for our next Bible study, where we continue with why three names were left out of Matthew's genealogy as we go through Matthew chapter 1, verse 8, part B. Thanks for watching.